Hey there, welcome back to Farmcraft. I'm John, and this is the beast. This is a Case 170B excavator that I bought recently. Bought it for a great deal, a lot of problems with it, so I'm trying to get it back into service. In the last video, I pulled off the injection pump, pulled all the injectors and oil filter housing and some other things. In this video, I want to get all that put back together and get this thing running again. I sent the pump to Area Diesel Service and they did a rebuild on it. They also rebuilt my injectors. They did a great job. Thank you guys. The problems I was having with the engine, it seemed like it was running pretty well until you put it under load. Under load, it definitely was down on power. It would really strain the engine just to pick up the boom. And then it would also smoke a lot whenever you put it under load. So it's certainly possible that some of that was coming from the injectors and the injection pump. I got a lot to do. Let's get to work. Before I can think about reassembly, there's another problem I have to fix. You might recall when I took this line off here, it was dripping water. That's weird. That did not seem like diesel fuel at all. That seemed like water. That was water. Alright, so we're looking down. This banjo right here is the one that water came out of. It goes to this line right here, which if you look at the top of it, has a hole in it. And I probably sprayed a bunch of water in that when I was power washing. And that goes to the intake. That is measuring the boost pressure and giving the pump information on how much fuel to inject. So, I need to replace that line. Looks like it's gonna want to break. I don't really want it to break because I'd like to measure it. And there we have it. All right, this fuel line is actually, no surprise, turned out to be a bit more of a challenge than you might think, because this is a metric banjo, and this is a, I have no idea what kind of flare fitting that is. These are things that I'm sure I can get with enough effort, but it's going to be a lot of effort. Then I have to have it bent exactly right, or I have to try to find what the part number for this is and get that. It's very difficult. Put all that together, I think the easier thing to do here is going to be to fix it. All this line does is transmit the boost pressure, basically how much is the turbo adding pressure to the intake, and tell the injection pump you're getting this much turbo, so add more fuel. And that's all it does. It needs to basically transmit an air pressure signal. It's not even going to have fuel going through it. So there's a couple ways I could fix it. One thing I could do is actually get another piece of tubing that would go over this and either weld or braze it over it, cut this in half and then put it across. But I think since it's only transmitting air, I think I'm just going to try to weld it up. There is a slight bend there, and I believe it was there as it was installed. I reviewed the footage. So basically I just need to sand this, get good bare metal there, and then we're going to try and weld it up. So this is 30 thousandths wire. I'm going with thinner wire so that I have less chance of blowing through. Pretty sure I saw a leak there. Yeah, there's one right there. There we go. 100 psi in there, no leak. Rather than just throw it in there like it is to rust, I'm going to go ahead and put some primer and paint on it. Alright, there's my repaired line. Got a delivery from Area Diesel. Look at that pump. That is going to look out of place on my farm. Injectors all look brand new. New oil cooler, gaskets, and copper washers and all that kind of stuff. I got to show you some before and after on this thing. That is an impressive transformation. And same with these injectors. Big thanks to Area Diesel. They've really hooked me up here, so we can finally start putting this thing back together, if I can remember how it came apart. So one of the first things I wanted to do was replace the copper washers on this line, but I'm just now noticing that it's pivoting here. Let me take that line off of there and see if it needs to be replaced. That would stink. Been sitting here waiting for parts. Alright, we're giving this line the old farmer test. Down here is where it swivels. Well, that's cool. So it doesn't leak, and I've got a couple new copper washers to go on the banjo bolt. Every one of these bolts has a washer on either side of the banjo, and I'm going to be replacing all of them. Several of you pointed out correctly in the last video that you can anneal these, and annealing copper is easy. All you got to do is heat it up until it starts to glow and then let it cool off. You can even quench it to cool it off. It doesn't matter how it cools off. It's the heating it up that anneals it. Now we're ready for the pump. The pump goes right there. I did not send the sediment bowl. Just thinking it would be at risk of breaking in transit. But of course, Area Diesel put a new one on there, including a filter. I didn't have a filter in there before. Didn't even know it was supposed to. This pump bolts on like this. And there's two nuts that are way back behind it. These two holes, those two holes that I really couldn't get to. Or were very, very hard to get to. I could glue these on with some CA glue, but I'm afraid they won't be in the right place. I could use some grease, but they'll easily fall off as soon as they get knocked when I'm trying to put this thing on. I could use like some high-tack, stuff they use for gaskets. I just want the washers to be there. Trying to reach back behind and get these washers on once the pump is in the way is going to be a nightmare. Alright, I'm going to try some high-tack here. So this stuff is for sticking a gasket to something for assembly, much the same thing that I'm doing here. So hopefully this will be helpful. I'll let that set up a little bit and see if I can stick the washers to it. So these are the kind of things you look for when you're reassembling. You can see there, you can see the slot, because that is a slot there so that the pump can be moved, but I can see exactly where the washer was, and also on this one. So I'm going to put it back exactly like that, just looking in through the slot and lining it up. Okay, see if I get lucky and those will stay on there while I try to put this thing back on. I think it's unlikely. What's going to happen is, as I'm putting it in, the bolt's going to hit and just knock the washer off. Almost definitely. Now there was some question about whether I was actually at top dead center or not, but Area Diesel said they just put it back on, put it back the way it was. So it's in the exact position it was when I took it off. So this should be correct. Oh, there goes at least one washer. All right, now I got to figure out how I'm getting those bolts in the back. Bolts, nuts, you know what I mean. So here's my setup. I've got my mirror up there and a couple lights shining down behind the pump. And I can't leave the camera there because that would be right in the way, but I can have you looking in the mirror, I think. So you can actually see one of the washers is on there, and that is the bottom bolt. So I am going to attempt to get the nut on that one. And the way I'm going to do this is with a piece of shop towel. I'm going to put it on the socket, and then I'm going to shove the nut into the socket. But that is in there pretty darn tight. The problem I might have is getting my socket back off of there. And see, that socket has a hole in it. So if it stays behind, I should be able to reach up in there with a wire and a hook in that hole and pull the socket off. So let's give this a try. Now, how to keep from cross-threading it. This stupid thing. So that did not work. It wants to cross-thread, so I'm going to put a wobble extension on it after I get this back off of here. But this is just a regular straight extension. This is a wobble extension. This allows this to kind of rotate around because it just didn't want to go on straight. It was kind of forcing it to go to cross thread the way I had it. So this should now allow it to hopefully find its own happy place. And then I'll be in my happy place. That might be it. Feels okay. It's either not doing anything or it's screwing on. No, I think it's screwed on. Now will the socket come off? No. All right, let me go get what to get that off of there. I'll find something. Got a piece of fencing wire. Just put a bend on the end. Well, let's see if we can get it back in there and pull that socket out. I'm on it. Oh yeah, I can just reach back and get it. Now, the next one needs a washer. And I've had one of these little cheapo grabby things. This is just a spring-loaded thing. These wires come out and will grab onto stuff. And it's just big enough that it gets a good hold on that washer, but I can also let go of it. So I should be able to reach back in there, put that on the stud, and then let it go and come back out. So that shouldn't be too bad, actually. Oh, jinxed myself. But here goes our little grabber. Just trying to get it on that stud. Yeah, not bad at all. Now, yep. Don't pull it off. Push it on. Nice. Okay, now our shop towel trick with the socket again, and we'll have two nuts on back there. Hitting the camera. Well, there goes one mirror. Is that bad luck? Ah. That's what we look like. So we got both of them on. They're not tight yet. And of course, neither are these. So now I need to make sure that I put the pump in the same position that it was in. So I've got this thing positioned right where it was, but there's also play on the other side where the hub, the drive hub, bolts to the pump gear. And the reality is the pump is in the same configuration it was when I took it off, and I haven't moved anything. I've not touched this engine. I took the key out so I couldn't screw up and accidentally bump it. So if I bolt this thing back on, it's going to be in the exact same timing it was. There aren't torque specs on this thing. I am just going to do kind of a standard. Those are 10mm studs there. So I'm going to do like a 50 Newton meter torque spec on it. By the way, a lot of people think that you can't torque bolts like that with a big long extension. That's not true. If you're using an impact wrench, you're not going to get near the torque on the bolt, because that's a dynamic type of torque that you're putting on there. You're smacking it with the hammer, and the extensions are going to flex and absorb a lot of that energy, so less ends up on the bolt or the nut. But when you're doing a torque wrench, it's a static system, it's not dynamic. So whatever torque is here is going to get transmitted here because it's a steady torque. It's not just a quick hammer blow. It's a steady, constant torque that you're applying. So you're going to get the same on either end of your extension, if that makes any sense. This is the other side of the injection pump, and I have to bolt it to the pump gear. So there's no torque spec for these either, but those are M8 bolts and they're 8.8 grade. I looked that up and came up with, I think it was like 28 Newton meters. We're back in time. Gotta do that guy first. Look at that. In that much time, a stupid mud dauber came and blocked up that hole. Okay. So I got a replacement for the broken button. I don't have the wiring for it yet, but I will go ahead and put it on. I may have to do some adjusting on this, because right now that button is supposed to be pressed, and then when this is in this position, the button's supposed to be out. It's not really getting pressed. But I don't even have wires for that yet, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. Let's go ahead and get this thing belts on so that we can run it. That's the goal for today. Dozer, we have food for you. We're getting some much needed rain today, but that's going to mean for some noise. But also, I was worried it was going to be raining on me while I was working on the excavator, because of course it won't fit under here. But yeah, my little tarp system, just pull it out over it, we're good to go. Gonna put the fuel filter housing back. Now we're getting ready to where we can start hooking up some fuel lines if I can figure out where these things went. I need to put that thing on. I'm going to go ahead and change out this filter. I'd say that counts as full. There it is. So let's start putting some banjos back together. Now, since I'm going to be bleeding this, I'm not going to tighten anything down. Just hand tight. So here's the hose and banjo that go on that bolt right there. That's the supply line from the tank. But this hose is kind of worn there, but it's got plenty of length to it and the rest of it looks fine. So I'm just going to cut it off right there, move the banjo back, and we'll throw it on. So I cut the line off and took the banjo out. All right, there's that. And now I got to do this banjo right there. All right, hiding right here is where this oil supply banjo goes. Click. All right, slowly but slowly. Now I've got two that go right here. This one goes first, and then this one goes on top of it. There's two banjos actually. It's kind of an interesting setup. I guess I can go ahead and tighten that one. Okay. All right, we are getting there. This is the return line, but there's no valve between the tank and it, and that line is going to run, and it goes up to the injectors, which are not hooked up right now, so it's going to drip up there if I hook that up. So I'm going to save that till the end. This line right here, this is where the boost pressure line went from the intake. That's the line that had the hole in it, and this is the one that had water coming out of it when I disconnected it. And I hope I got the angle on that right. I mean, I can do a little bending to it if I have to. Let's see if we can get it in there. Like one of those blacksmith's puzzles. Sit and fiddle with it for an hour. All right, it took a while, but I did get it finally threaded in there. And quite close to the banjo. I'm going to bolt that up first, then I'll bolt up the intake, and then I'll probably hit that with a little more paint and let it dry, mainly where I welded it, just to keep that protected. And by the way, I did confirm that I didn't weld the pipe closed. There's plenty of airflow through it. Click. Getting somewhere. Now it's the oil dipstick tube, which goes from right there, because I've taken it off all the way, and to right here. And there's some issues with that tube, so let's go fix that first. Remember this dipstick hose that I broke off when I was taking it apart? Ugh. Man down. First casualty. Well, I was fully planning on just buying a new piece of hose and just replacing it, and thought that would be very uninteresting. So I didn't film getting to this point. But there's where it broke off. This is the piece that broke off. It was down inside there with this in the middle of it to, you know, keep it from getting smashed, and then this ferrule to make it a compression fit so that it wouldn't leak. So once you screw all that together, this goes in here, this is in the middle, the hose is in there, and you tighten it down, the ferrule squeezes in and makes for an oil-tight fitting. Here's the problem. I can't get this tubing. It is metric, not available where I am. Could I get it? Yeah, I probably could, but I've come to realize that I can fix this thing and make it work just fine. Now, why can't I just take this piece out, put this in, and roll on? Well, that changes the length of your dipstick. The depth of the dipstick is important and tells you if you have enough oil in there or not. If I shorten this tube, the dipstick is going to actually go in deeper into and make you think there's enough oil in there when there's not. Don't want to do that. I mean, this basically I would be shorting myself that much oil every time I checked it. And I could work around that, obviously, but I'd rather just not and do it right. So this is what I've come to realize. I can put this end down in there and roll on with that. At the top here, where this goes on, you'll see in a minute, it is very long. Like there's a piece of metal that this pushes up onto, and it's a good 2 inches long. It's a lot longer than this. So I can just stick this on there, and I'm going to tape it together just for good measure. I don't really want water to be able to get in there, but I'll make sure that the hose clamp is below it so that it can't leak. And the length will be the same, it's just the broken area will be at the top where there's never any oil anyway to leak. If that makes any sense. So basically we're cobbling it together with a little farmer fix, but it's one that's good as new in my book. I love fixes like that. Free and quick. This needs to go on. That's the nut that's going to tighten it. Yep. If we can get that to go in there without destroying that. Alright, so I've measured the ID, depends on where you measure, like there it's like 325. The OD is 400. So I'm going to turn something down to drive that in without destroying it. That was 5 minutes well spent. Alright. And this just press fits in. So I can go ahead and screw these together. So now all I'm going to do on this end is just tape that on there. This just presses into the block and it doesn't even press that hard. And I don't quite get how it doesn't leak. I know oil is just kind of splashing up on it, but I'm going to put some gasket maker around this right here because that kind of will be right near a face once I install it. It won't hurt anything. And I'm using red because it's what I have that's open. Dipstick tube goes. It's like a 2-inch stub there to work with. Went on pretty easy. there's the upper end of that oil dipstick tube, and the plastic's all the way up to there. So the length hasn't changed. This banjo right here, it goes right there. So I think we're ready for an oil cooler, but the new oil cooler needs some parts off the old one. So let's do that first. Can you tell which one's the new one? So yeah, you know, some people said these things can be fixed. I think it depends on where the leak is. I mean, this thing's like down inside amid all the fins. One commenter that's a welder said that the only way you're going to do it is to cut the thing open and then re-weld it back up. And given that it's aluminum, it's old, it's full of oil, it's going to be a nightmare to try to weld it and have it not, you know, have a bunch of porosity and stuff in it. Yeah, I think replacing it is the way to go. Wow. So it's just a little thermostat. Well, I'm not positive how this thing works, but I just put a heat gun on it and that thing popped up. So I think what happens is it's in there and this spring is pushing it all the way in that direction, but when it gets too hot, this pushes back and it slides these holes down to be exposed and allow oil to flow. So I think it works. If someone out there is a Deutz expert and knows otherwise, maybe tell me I'm wrong, but nothing else really seems to move other than that. I'm going to clean that up on the wire wheel. Now the trick is going to be, this thing has to slot in behind the oil filter housing with these gaskets. So that might be fun. So I think this is a perfect place to use this high tack. I don't want it to stick to the other side, I just want it to stick to this side. That way if I ever have to take this oil cooler off, the gasket should just stay with the cooler and be intact to be used again. The good news is, if these gaskets ever did get torn or ruined somehow, they'd be pretty easy to make. It looks like it's blocking that hole, but it's not. The hole actually follows, that edge follows the same contour as the gasket there. Alright, I'm gonna have to get out the boroscope and look in there and make sure those gaskets stayed put. It's not that hard to get it on, but those gaskets, I mean, how do you manage that? Trying to put this on with the oil cooler there would also be, I guess, not impossible, not very fun. Well, from the looks of things, I'm betting you can tell that didn't go well. Yeah, the gaskets were getting ripped off and it's all chewed up. That's worthless. I don't even want to put that on there because this thing's a lot of work to get to. If it's leaking, yeah, I don't want to deal with that. The one that's on the back is in better shape, but it's creased here. Yeah, I'm not doing it. So high tack is good stuff if you need to just kind of hold the gasket in position while you gently put the part in place, you know, without it falling off or something. But for this application, this is not going to work. And I think the oil filter housing has to go on after this, even though that's going to be a royal pain. That way I can get the gaskets in position and visualize them as I'm putting the bolts in. Because trying to slide it in back behind this, you can't see anything. There's no room to like lift or maneuver. You have no idea which way to go. That wasn't fun or kid friendly. So yeah, we're gonna try this again. The other problem is I broke one of the oil lines in that process. Is that a problem? You think that'll leak? I don't know how. It just broke. So it was probably about to break anyway. Have to get a new line for that. There's no fixing it. Wonder how hard it's going to be to get another one of those. Alright, so this time I'm going to use aviation sealant. This is Permatex Forma gasket. This stuff really sets up and should permanently attach that gasket in position. And of course the Deutz manual says nothing about any of this. Install the oil cooler. Those are your instructions. That Deutz manual leaves a little bit to be desired. So to ensure that these gaskets stay put, I am going to clamp them together. I just got some scrap pieces of metal, and I've put a light coat of grease on them so that it can't stick to this, but it will stick to what I've already put it on. So yeah, I want to put that there. And, you know, really, this probably isn't necessary if I put the oil cooler on first and then put the oil filter housing onto it. I could probably do it just with dry gaskets, but this should make things a lot easier in the future if this has to come off of again. Remember this hose that I need to replace? Well, it's been a couple of days and several trips to the store and several phone calls. Not easy. There's the answer to my hose problems. This is a metric banjo to a number 4 JIC adapter, and then you just make JIC hoses, and voila. You've got a hose with a banjo on each end. These are hydraulic hoses, but they are rated to handle anything petroleum except gasoline or propane. So yeah, they're fine for engine oil and hydraulic fluid. Diesel fuel would be fine as well. But these are going to have engine oil in them. And you obviously notice that there's two. That's because I realized what a headache it is taking this oil cooler off. That short hose that is behind the injection pump, I can still reach back there and get it, and I did. I took it off and brought it in and had to make a new one of those as well, so that I don't have to do this again anytime soon. Okay, at no small amount of effort, I did get this line replaced. I was actually able to reach up behind it with a wrench and loosen it, take it off, and get it back into position without removing the pump. I couldn't see anything. I certainly couldn't film anything, but it's there. Let me point out that once the oil cooler is on there, there would be absolutely no way I could get this line on. I just wouldn't have access to reach behind the pump to do it. Let's go on to this now. I've got the oil filter housing off and gonna leave it that way until I get this oil cooler on. I'm just putting a very thin coating of grease, but if I ever need to take this off, it should not ruin the gaskets. That's the idea. This is a very tough area to work in. I got this bolt in. Of course, the oil filter housing needs to go on first, but that at least is right. So that allows me to know that that is where that oil cooler needs to go. See, I'm way over here looking up at this. I'm actually standing on some blocks to reach it. And this is the hydraulic oil tank. I mean, taking that out, that would be a job. Yeah, there's just no access. I can't get to it from above. I can't get to it. I mean, this is the only way. And there's no getting your head in here to see and line things up. So, yeah, it's just challenging. Take my word for it. Also gonna see if I can get away with tightening this down to really hold it there. Yeah, see, that's still loose. That gasket's gonna wanna come off. That really surprises me. Usually that aviation sealant really holds it. Anything it can do to make it hard, it's doing it, that's for sure. Can't believe that gasket is still not sticking. Thankfully, the gasket on the other side did stick and is now held in place by the oil cooler. So at least there's that. So here's the big challenge. This thing, you can barely even see, needs to go past this line, which is attached up under the engine. I cannot take that line off to get it out of the way. It's a hard line. And that banjo goes right there. So the question is, am I going to be able to work that into position without screwing up the gasket? How do I line that gasket up? All right, change of plans, obviously. I am going to high tack the gasket to the oil filter housing and have the bolts in place to keep it lined up as I'm putting it in. I think that will work. And yeah, this is one of those weird things. This is all about the placement of the engine on the machine. If this engine was on a different machine, it would probably be a piece of cake to do this. And if it was just in a different orientation, it would be easy. But just the way everything sits, this is very challenging. There, combine that high tack with those bolts. I really don't think that's going to come off of there. This is the side that was greased before. I'm going to grease it again. I really was not expecting putting this back together to be so hard. I mean, I got the oil cooler out by removing 3 bolts. But getting it back in with these gaskets is a totally different story. All right, cross your fingers. Wow. All right, feels a little tight. I'm gonna loosen the oil cooler just so everything can line up like it wants to. Yeah, that helped. All right. Man, that was a lot of work just to get that oil cooler back in. Grief. And here's the line that broke before. Well, that sucks. I moved the camera to snug that up. I didn't do it that tight and the thing broke off. Wonder how hard it's going to be to get a new one of those. Man, this thing is, every time something goes wrong, I have to wait for another part. And there's just no way I can predict what the next part's going to be. And I end up just chasing my tail. It's taking forever. Alright, well, old Napa came through. They had a metric banjo bolt in stock. How about that? I immediately drop it. Let's make sure it threads in before we start fighting this hose. Yep. And I really don't think I over torqued the last one, but maybe I did, so I'm going to use a torque wrench this time. Now, if you're wondering, this is the heat control for the cab, and this is the control wire, which is not hooked to anything, but that would turn this, basically open this valve in here and allow the oil to flow through these lines into the cab. But none of it works. The blower motor doesn't work in the cab. I don't really need heat. Just being in an enclosed cab in the winter is so much more than I need. So I'm probably never going to fix that, but I do want to leave everything there just in case. So I want you guys to see the oil right there on that little thing. I don't even know what to call that. I'm pretty sure I am getting some leakage around the oil pan itself, but then that lower section of the sump is also leaking. So that's another thing we're gonna have to deal with at some point, but not today. All right. So I'm gonna pre-fill this oil filter because it's a vertical one that I can do that, and because the machine's been sitting for a little while. You know, when you're just doing a regular oil change and you pull the old filter off and put the new filter on and then start the engine again within an hour of it last running, I think this is totally unnecessary. But the longer an engine sits, the more the oil drips off everything that it's lubricating, and the more it needs that oil when it first starts up. And in my view, that's the reason you do assembly lube, because it's really sticky and it's going to be a while before you get the engine back together and get it running. So the assembly lube stays on everything. But if you're doing a rebuild and you know you're going to be cranking that engine over in just a matter of a day or two, that's no different from the thing sitting in your driveway for a day or two. That's just my view. But I'm pre-filling this one at least most of the way. So finally we're getting close to being able to crank the engine over. I haven't been able to do that since I took this pump off, and now I've got most of the oil lines and fuel lines all hooked up. I just have a couple more things to do on the pump, because I have to hook up this return line This is direct to the tank, and the tank is above this point, so this line will flow as soon as I take this stopper out. I haven't hooked it up yet because I was worried it was going to drip, because one of the return lines goes up here to the injectors. But I just put a regular bolt with some copper washers in there, so I think that would effectively stop up that line. And yeah, I could have done this a while back. So let's make a mess. It wasn't too bad. Now I need to hook this up because I want to crank the engine, and the pump needs lubrication when I'm doing that. All right. And there. I don't really need to bleed it to the injectors because there are no injectors right now, and I don't even have these lines hooked up. I'm going to blow all those out before I do hook them up. So here is that other banjo that is the return line for the injectors. They all hook together with that little Z lightning bolt shaped line. But for now, I want to crank this thing over a little bit, make sure I don't have any leaks on the fuel system, make sure the injection pump is getting fuel so that it's lubricated, and make sure that my high class remote start switch actually works. So I've got this thing wired up. This thing should crank when I flip the switch. From up here it looks like everything's going okay, but the view from down below is a little different. Whoa. Okay guys, I had to step away yesterday. It's because this thing started leaking, and where it was leaking is the worst possible place. It's leaking up there behind the injection pump. It is the most inaccessible line that I've come across yet. It's the other end of this line, up in against the block, in between the pump and the block. And although I think I can take it off as it sits, I don't know about putting it back on. The nut right here, which was not on the original line, that's because this is an adapted, you know, kind of cobbled together fix. That is hitting the block and not allowing the copper washers to compress. So how this is supposed to work is when you tighten the banjo bolt, it compresses the banjo against this boss here, and the two copper washers compress and everything seals up. But here, the nut for the hydraulic line is hitting the boss and preventing the copper washers from being compressed. So I thought about putting in extra washers, but I think I would have to put a lot of them, and that's quite a hack and likely to leak in the future. And I just, well, I got online and made several calls, and I finally found the part number for this line. The original line, what's supposed to be on there, doesn't have this nut. It's just the banjo directly into a flexible line that's a lot easier to work with than this hydraulic hose. And that is on the way to me. Whether I'm going to be able to get it on or not is a whole different story. Obviously, I can get the line on there. The question is, am I going to have to remove the pump to do it? To remove the pump, I'm going to have to remove the oil cooler again. That is a whole lot of work, and let's just say I am definitely putting some brain power to figuring out how I'm going to get this line on here without taking all that stuff back off. I think the old beast thought, well, I got out of having to do the swing bearing, so let's give him something to make it a challenge. Jerk. Well, there you go, guys. I obviously didn't get as far as I was hoping to get in this video, but the beast is throwing me curveballs right and left. And there's more that you haven't seen yet. You'll see it in the next video on this machine. I can't crank the engine without that hose, and the next thing I really want to do, I'm going to boroscope all the cylinders. I want to check the compression. I need to get the injectors back in. I need to adjust the valves. A lot more things that we're going to do, but I need to be able to turn this engine over before I can really move on. And just so you know, with waiting for parts, I probably won't have another video on the excavator for 2 weeks, but I do have another video planned for next week, so thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. I see you. Did I find where you were sleeping today? If I hold still, he doesn't see me. Have a good evening.